hardly distinguishable from the many other points of light Voyager would see. Nearby planets, far off suns. But precisely because of the obscurity of our world thus revealed, such a picture might be worth having. It had been well understood by the scientists and philosophers of classical antiquity that the Earth was a mere point in a vast, encompassing timeline.
And my film career started in Albany, New York, at a CBS TV station.
How'd you get that job?
Well, I kind of came in the back door on that one. My best friend growing up his father was a commercial photographer, and he helped him get a part-time job at the CBS station in Albany while he was in college. And I used to visit him on the weekends, and I was a shutterbug in school with still cameras, but the movie cameras fascinated me. So I would visit my friend Frank on the weekend, and Frankie would take me out on his assignments for the news department, and I learned how to use the gear, which wasn't really difficult. And it really floated my boat. I enjoyed it, and it was something I really knew I was going to love. I went out with Frank a number of times to the point where I could shoot the stories with the film camera, the sound camera, the silent camera, all 16 millimeter black and white film. And one weekend Frank suggested that I take the assignment sheet on that Saturday morning and go out and cover the assignments while he did all the busy work in the lab, mixing chemicals, cleaning up, and then he was going to get on the phone and hook us up for a couple of dates that night. So I took the gear and drove the car, not being an employee of the station. I went out to shot a fire and a ribbon cutting and a couple of other things, and I ended up at Albany State University filming a speech with a Congresswoman, Shirley Chisholm. And assignment went great. I got the sound and the cutaway shots. And the event was over. I was packing up the gear, and a man in a suit and tie walked up to me and said, "How you doing, young man? Who are you and who do you work for?" And I said, "Well, I'm Rick Armstrong, and I with Channel 10 News." And he went, "That's funny. I'm the news director at Channel 10, and I don't know you." He had Frankie on the phone in a couple of minutes and fired him.
And gave you the job?
No, he was, this guy, Walt Halver, was the news director, and he was a pretty decent guy, and he knew Frankie's dad real well. So Mr. Halver had Frankie in his office on Monday morning and gave him a chewing out and gave him his job back. At the time, I was working in my father's sheet metal shop. It was the summertime, and I had finished my school year at a community college. And I got a phone call one evening in the middle of the summer, and it was Walt Halver. And he said, "I know you're in school, but I have an entry-level position, a union apprenticeship position for a cameraman, and I wanted to give you first shot at it." He said, "Because in this business, you got to have balls." And he said, "Kid, you got balls."
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday.
What about that moment when you met John Lennon?
I,
Wasn't that right before he died?
I think, no, that was a few years. I think I met John Lennon in, I think it was maybe 72 or 73, which is probably 10 years before he died, I'm guessing.
I thought it was right before.
What's that?
I thought it was like months before. Or something.
No. I was working in Houston, Texas for Cap Cities ABC. That's what it became. Actually, it wasn't Cap Cities. It was called Cap Cities then. I was working in Houston, just a news photographer for the ABC station. And John Lennon and Yoko Ono were coming to Houston. Yoko Ono was having a custody battle with her ex-husband for a daughter. And they had to be in court. I had his hotel staked out. We had information of the hotel they were staying at. It was secret to the general public, but so I was staked out at the hotel with my film camera. And when a big limousine pulls up, then I'm standing in front of the hotel, and out steps John Lennon and Yoko Ono out of the limo, and he's got like a Western jacket on and a cowboy hat, and he walks right up to me and introduces himself, and he says, "What do you think of my cowboy boots?" And he pulls his pant leg up and shows me his cowboy boots, and we talked a little bit. And they invited me up to their room for lunch, which I didn't eat a single thing, but I did go up there with the camera and got a little bit of an interview with them. And
You didn't get a picture of him?
oh yeah,
Oh, you did?
I didn't get a picture of the two of us together. I wish I had, but I
So you messed up.
I had great sound and pictures of him and Yoko Ono, at the hotel and up in the room. I wasn't there very long. They had a manager with them, and he kind of showed me out after a couple of minutes. But what was interesting is the next day, I think it was the next day, I was covering the court proceedings. And back in those days, cameras and news guys and reporters and still photographers, that you could actually be in the courthouse. There wasn't security like there is today. So cameramen and still guys were lined up along this hallway where they would come in and walk down the hallway to go to the courtroom. And when he when John Lennon walked down the hallway, he spotted me in the group of photographers, and he came over to me and mentioned me, said my name, "Rick, how you doing?" And I don't remember exactly what he said because it just blew me away. But all the guys around me were like, "What? You know John Lennon?" Which I really didn't, but I had met him the day before, and it was pretty interesting.
So you've actually won 4 Emmys?
Technically, in the early 70s, 72 or 73, I'd have to look. I worked on 2 documentary projects for WBAL with a producer-reporter named Lloyd Kramer. One of them was an in-depth look at a jazz singer who was a kind of a Billie Holiday style singer from the Baltimore area. The other documentary was on a deaf dancer who was a student at Gallaudet College. Both those documentaries won Emmys. And
In the same year?
Same year. Well, we were awarded, Lloyd and I were awarded 2 Emmys, and we were co-producers on those projects. And so he took one and I took one.
There it is, the famous foreboding Tower of London. For 900 years, the Tower of London has stood on the banks of the Thames. As a royal palace, a fortress, and a state prison, its ancient walls have seen the best and the worst of English history. King Henry VI.
The irony of the other 2 Emmys is they were both for projects I worked on in London, England, 30 years apart. The first one was in 1982. I did a feature piece for the syndicated TV show PM Magazine on the Tower of London.
Wasn't it on the Beefeaters too?
The Beefeaters are the official guards of the Tower of London. Tower of London is a very interesting place. It's been around for centuries, and so I won an Emmy for in the feature category. That was in the Tower of London piece.
What are the other categories?
The fourth Emmy was for the composite work from the 2012 Olympics in London.
For
I was working for
the
NBC.
shooting?
Camera work, yeah.
What about Jacques Cousteau?
I actually I didn't work with Jacques Cousteau, but I met Jacques Cousteau, I'm sorry? I met Jacques Cousteau and his son Philippe in Houston, Texas in the mid-70s. I had just completed an underwater documentary, a 30-minute underwater documentary. It was my pet project that I talked the news director, the same news director that hired me in Albany, New York. I talked him into allowing me to do a documentary on the Gulf of Mexico. It was kind of an environmental documentary. It was way ahead of its time. And I spent a lot of weekends diving off a dive boat in various places in the Gulf of Mexico. And I finished the documentary, and Jacques Cousteau and the Calypso was in port in Galveston for repairs. And we contacted him to be on a local talk show. And while he was at the station, he sat down and watched my documentary and kind of critiqued it. And he was somewhat, complimentary. I was just a kid. I was in my early 20s, and I did it all. I did everything. I did the shooting, I did the writing. I had some help. I had a friend named David Glad who helped me write it. But I edited it. It was all film, and I ended up entering it in a couple of underwater film festivals. And Cousteau invited me out on the Calypso. When they finished the repairs, we went out on kind of a shakedown cruise where we went out and they were making sure everything worked properly, and it was pretty neat.
It's billed as Garbage Day at City Hall. People, organizations sympathetic to the striking sanitation workers said they'll take their trash and dump it at City Hall. Here they come. The police are ready. We'll see what happens.
It was the sanitation workers were on strike, and they were picketing City Hall. I went to cover the demonstration with a reporter from WBAL named Ron Smith. He later became a very famous talk show host. Ron and I went to the Baltimore City Hall, and back in those days, the police didn't fool around. They had, big billy clubs, and one gentleman with the sanitation workers made the mistake of trying to dump a trash bag of garbage on this big burly guy. He was a major with the police force. And that started, all hell broke loose. As you can see in the film, I was kind of right in the middle of all of it. Luckily, I did not get a wood shampoo like a lot of those demonstrators got.
They came to dump their trash at City Hall. They didn't make it. They didn't get through the police lines. The garbage is here. It's really a a minor irritation in the light of the sanitation strike. A couple of trucks will come by, they'll pick it up, and soon there'll be no sign that this skirmish ever happened. But it did. Ron Smith, Action
The
News.
assignment. I remember walking in the office that day, and the woman that worked the assignment desk said, "How would you like to go for an airplane ride today?" And I went, "Sure." And I was always up for something like that. And she said, "Go to Martin Marietta Airport. The Blue Angels are there for a show this week, and we're allowed to send somebody for a media ride." And so okay. I drove to Martin Marietta. They took me into this locker room where all the pilots were, and they gave me a flight suit and a helmet and gave me about 10 minutes instruction how to eject or how to position yourself if you had to eject, and all kinds of stuff you didn't really want to think about. And so they popped me up in the seat, in the back seat of this fighter jet. Was an A-4 Skyhawk, a carrier. It's a carrier-based fighter. And we took off, taxi took off, and I learned later that these pilots take turns flying the plane with the media guy in it, and their sole mission is to try to make you blow lunch. Which I didn't do. I managed to hold it down, but they made it very clear that if anything like that was going to occur, they showed you where the bag was, but I disappointed them. Redskins won 3 out of 4. They got beat by the Raiders in the second one, I think in 1984. Raiders just stomped them. But I was at the first one in '83 when they played the Dolphins in the Rose Bowl, and I got one of the best shots of the John Riggins running play where he ran and he was dragging guys from the Dolphins until they finally fell off and he scored, and that was the beginning of the end of the Dolphins in that game. The Redskins won.
Just totally dwarf this, but take a look. That's what Skyfox showed us earlier today from the Pentagon. This is not live. This was earlier, a couple hours ago, from Skyfox, and you can see the different layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers in. The different rings, they call them, leading into the atrium of the Pentagon, and the first 3, E, D, and C, were penetrated by the American airline jet and are still on fire. This a couple of hours ago, but still on fire at this hour, 9 hours later. So until they get this thing contained, they cannot go in.
9/11, I was on an assignment I was on my way to cover a Michael Jordan press conference when he was announcing he was coming to Washington. And I was with a sports reporter, and we were in front of the MCI Center just getting ready to go in the building when we heard the boom. We knew that the attack had already happened in New York, and when we heard the boom, we knew what that was, and within a matter of half an hour or so, we worked our way to the Pentagon, and we were there for a couple of days covering the fire.
As we present the most requested story we've ever had. It's about how we put on PM Magazine, what goes on behind the scenes. You're going to join us as we go out and shoot a story and put a whole program on the air. Then in our second story, we'll watch a woman walk into a bank vault and run off with $10,000.
The 10:30 time slot is highly competitive. After 10 hours over 2 days.
What's great about this industry is the diversity in assignments and the places you go and the people you meet. Worked in lots of sports assignments, so I've been to major sporting events, lots of Super Bowls. For PM Magazine, we were in Europe. I flew the Concorde to Paris, did a story on the Concorde, flying 1,500 miles an hour. We did stories on the vineyards in France. Went to London a couple of times. Went to Tahiti, Hawaii. working for NBC Sports and CBS News and Fox News, and I worked for a show called PM Magazine, which was a syndicated feature show that ran every day. I was on a travel crew out of Washington, D.C., and we traveled all over the world. My career in film, news, sports, production took me all over the country and all over the world.